Cassie and Ethan's seemingly perfect marriage is shattered when Ethan's emotional infidelity with a coworker, Marissa, comes to light. As Cassie grapples with betrayal, Ethan's half-truths and lingering connections to Marissa escalate the tension, leaving viewers fuming at his selfishness and deceit. Despite Ethan's attempts to make amends, including therapy and personal sacrifices, Marissa's cryptic actions resurface, deepening the turmoil. The story exposes the raw emotions of trust, betrayal, and the uphill battle of rebuilding a broken relationship, leaving the audience questioning whether forgiveness is even possible, or if some wounds are simply too deep to heal. Welcome back, and thanks for tuning in to the Cheating Diaries. We appreciate every single one of you. If you're watching this, let us know where in the world you're from in the comments below. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was the summer of 2017 in Charleston, South Carolina, a city where cobblestone streets met sprawling oaks dripping with Spanish moss. For most, it was a picture-perfect slice of Southern charm, but for Cassandra "Cassie" Murray, it was the backdrop for a life that felt anything but picturesque. Cassie, 34, was a middle school teacher with a knack for connecting with even the most difficult students, the kind of teacher who stayed late to tutor struggling kids and showed up to soccer games on weekends. She lived for her work, and perhaps more importantly, for her family. Her husband, Ethan, was her high school sweetheart turned life partner, and together they had built what looked, from the outside, like the perfect marriage. But here's the thing about perfection. It's often just a cover for the cracks underneath. Ethan was a financial advisor with a reputation for charm that extended well beyond the office. With his tailored suits, easy smile, and Southern gentleman manners, Ethan made friends and admirers wherever he went. He was the guy everyone wanted at the barbecue, and Cassie had always taken pride in being the woman by his side. That summer, though, something had changed. It all started on a Tuesday, during one of their usual date nights. Cassie had planned a cozy dinner at a waterfront bistro, a favorite spot from their early years of marriage, but Ethan was late. Not 5 or 10 minutes late, either. 45 minutes, Cassie sat at the table, her glass of wine untouched, scrolling through her phone to avoid the pitying glances from other diners. When Ethan finally walked in, his excuse was as smooth as ever. "Sorry, sweetheart. Got tied up with a last-minute client call. You know how it is." Cassie wanted to believe him. Really, she did. But something about his tone didn't sit right. It was too rehearsed, too practiced. Still, she smiled and waved it off, telling herself she was just overthinking things. After all, Ethan was always busy with work, right? But that wasn't the first sign. It was just the first one Cassie noticed. Now let's talk about the other main player in this story, Marissa Daniels. Marissa was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went. At 29, she was Ethan's coworker, a financial analyst newly transferred to the Charleston office. With her flawless blowout, designer heels, and an Instagram feed full of tropical vacations and rooftop cocktails, Marissa radiated confidence and glamour. She wasn't shy about her ambitions either. She was gunning for a promotion, and Ethan, as her senior colleague, had been more than happy to mentor her. Cassie had heard about Marissa in passing, how Ethan praised her sharp mind and drive during casual dinner conversations. At first, Cassie had brushed it off, but as Marissa's name started coming up more and more, she began to feel a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. Back to Cassie. One evening, while folding laundry, she overheard Ethan on a phone call. His voice was low and warm, a tone she hadn't heard in months. "Don't worry about it, Marissa," he said, laughing softly. "I've got your back always." Cassie froze, her hands clutching a pair of socks. Always, the word echoed in her mind, sharp and accusing. When Ethan hung up, she confronted him. "Who were you talking to?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "Oh, just Marissa," Ethan replied without missing a beat. "She's nervous about tomorrow's presentation. I was giving her a little pep talk." Cassie forced a smile and nodded, but the knot in her stomach tightened. She didn't want to be that wife, the jealous, suspicious type who didn't trust her husband. But something about the way he said Marissa's name made her skin crawl. The next morning, Cassie was up early, as usual, preparing her lesson plans. Ethan, still in bed, received a notification on his phone. Cassie wasn't one to snoop, but the screen lit up long enough for her to catch a glimpse. Marissa Daniels. Thanks for last night. Her heart sank. Last night. What was Marissa thanking him for? Cassie stared at the phone, torn between grabbing it and pretending she hadn't seen anything. Eventually, she chose the latter. But the seed of doubt had been planted. From then on, things started adding up. Ethan's late nights at the office became more frequent. His phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, was now glued to his side, face down. He'd taken up a sudden interest in his appearance. New cologne, a gym membership, even teeth-whitening strips. Cassie tried to reason with herself. Maybe he's just stressed, she thought. Maybe this is a midlife crisis thing. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Then came the day everything unraveled. It was a humid Saturday afternoon, and Cassie had taken their golden retriever, Max, to the park. As she sat on a bench scrolling through her phone, she noticed a new post on Ethan's firm's Instagram page, a candid photo of the office staff at a recent charity gala. Ethan stood at the edge of the group, his arm draped casually but unmistakably over Marissa's shoulder. Cassie's chest tightened as she stared at the photo. It wasn't just the pose, it was the way they were looking at each other. Ethan's smile was wide and carefree, and Marissa's gaze was fixed on him with an intensity that made Cassie's stomach turn. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about that photo felt wrong, very wrong. When Cassie got home, she decided to confront Ethan. She wasn't accusing him, yet she just wanted answers. So, she began casually, how was the charity gala last week? Ethan barely looked up from his laptop. Good busy. You know how those things are. And Marissa? Cassie asked, keeping her tone light. She looked nice in the group photo. For a split second, Ethan hesitated. It was subtle, a flicker in his expression, a slight stiffening of his shoulders. But Cassie caught it. Yeah, he said quickly. I guess so. I didn't really notice. Didn't notice, Cassie thought. His arm around Marissa's shoulder said otherwise. That night, while Ethan was in the shower, Cassie finally gave in to the temptation to snoop. She unlocked his phone, her hands trembling, and scrolled through his messages. What she found wasn't explicit, but it was enough to confirm her suspicions. Late-night texts from Marissa filled with inside jokes, heart emojis, and phrases like, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." There were no declarations of love, no incriminating photos, but the tone was intimate, too intimate for coworkers. Cassie felt her throat tighten. She put the phone down, her mind racing. Was she overreacting? Was this just a harmless friendship, or was it the beginning of something more? One thing was clear. Her perfect marriage wasn't as perfect as she'd thought. Cassie couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. The texts, the late nights, the photo. It was all piling up into something she could no longer ignore. But here's the thing. She wasn't the kind of person to act on impulse. Cassie was a thinker, a planner, and if she was going to confront Ethan about her suspicions, she needed more than just her gut feeling. The following week, she found herself scrolling through online forums during her lunch break, searching for advice on infidelity. She hesitated at first. It felt invasive, wrong even. But the more she read, the more it dawned on her. Many of the signs she'd been noticing lined up. She hated how textbook it all seemed. That evening, while Ethan was out at yet another client meeting, Cassie decided to take the plunge. She downloaded a tracking app onto his phone, one of those discreet ones that promised to reveal hidden truths. She told herself it wasn't about spying. It was about finding clarity, because if she was wrong, she'd have the proof she needed to let go of her doubts. But if she was right... The next day, while Ethan was at work, she logged in to check the app's data. Her stomach dropped when she saw it. Ethan hadn't gone to his usual haunts for client meetings. Instead, his location history showed a coffee shop across town, the same one Cassie had heard him recommend to Marissa in passing. The timestamps didn't lie. He wasn't working late. He was meeting her. That night, Cassie's demeanor shifted. She was no longer nervous or unsure. Instead, she became calculated, watching Ethan closely, looking for any tells. And oh, were there tells. Ethan's sudden enthusiasm for hitting the gym, a clear excuse to leave the house. The way he placed his phone face down at dinner, Classic. Even his scent, a new cologne she hadn't bought for him, felt like a slap in the face. Still, Cassie kept her cards close to her chest. She wasn't ready to confront him yet. Not without something irrefutable, but the cracks in her patience were starting to show. During breakfast one morning, Ethan caught her staring at him. "What?" he asked, his tone light, but guarded. Cassie smiled faintly. "Nothing, just wondering how work's going. You've been so busy lately." Ethan shrugged. "You know how it is, tax season. Everyone's scrambling for advice." Cassie nodded, but inside, her resolve hardened. She wasn't going to take vague answers anymore. The breaking point came a few days later, when Cassie decided to follow him. She felt ridiculous, like a character in a soap opera, tailing her own husband through the streets of Charleston. But when Ethan pulled into the parking lot of that same coffee shop, her doubts turned into reality. She parked far enough away to avoid being seen and watched as he got out of the car. Moments later, Marissa emerged from the shop, her laughter ringing out as she greeted him. Cassie's chest tightened. She wasn't sure what she expected to see, but the casual ease between them was worse than she imagined. They weren't even trying to hide it. Marissa playfully swatted Ethan's arm, and he leaned in closer, their heads almost touching as they spoke. Cassie couldn't hear their conversation, but the body language said it all. She snapped a few photos with her phone, her hands trembling. This was her proof. But as she sat there, watching them walk back inside together, a new feeling washed over her. Anger, not just at Ethan, but at herself. She had spent weeks doubting her instincts, making excuses for his behavior, and now the truth was staring her in the face. When Ethan came home that night, Cassie was waiting for him in the living room, her laptop open on the coffee table. She had the photos pulled up, ready for him to see. "Hey, babe," Ethan said casually, setting his keys on the counter. "What's for dinner?" Cassie didn't answer right away. She waited until he walked into the room, then turned the laptop toward him. "What's this?" she asked, her voice steady but ice-cold. Ethan froze, his eyes darting to the screen. The color drained from his face as he took in the photos. "Cassie, it's not what it looks like," he stammered. "Oh, really?" she shot back. "Because it looks like you've been lying to me. It looks like you've been spending time with Marissa when you said you were working late. So please, enlighten me. What exactly am I looking at?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, struggling to find the right words. "She's just a friend, a coworker. We were going over some work stuff, that's all." Cassie laughed bitterly. "Work stuff? At a coffee shop with no laptop, no files, just the two of you giggling like teenagers?" "It's not like that," Ethan insisted. "I swear it's harmless." "Harmless?" Cassie's voice rose. "Do you think I'm stupid, Ethan? Do you think I haven't noticed the late nights, the texts, the way you hide your phone? How long has this been going on?" Ethan hesitated, and that was all the confirmation Cassie needed. "You know what?" she said, standing up. "I don't even care what your excuses are. I'm done playing detective. If you're not going to be honest with me, then I'm done." "Cassie, wait," Ethan pleaded. "It's not what you think." "Save it," she snapped, grabbing her keys. "I need some air." Cassie drove aimlessly for hours, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on her. She replayed Ethan's words in her head, searching for any hint of sincerity. But deep down, she knew the truth. He wasn't going to admit to anything unless he was forced to. By the time she returned home, Ethan was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. He looked up when she walked in, his eyes red-rimmed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You're right, I haven't been honest." Cassie folded her arms, waiting. I've been spending time with Marissa," he admitted. "But it's not what you think. We've gotten close, yes. But nothing has happened, I swear." Cassie's eyes narrowed. "Do you expect me to believe that after everything?" "I made a mistake," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "I should have told you. I shouldn't have let it get this far. But Cassie, I love you. I don't want to lose you." For a moment, Cassie felt a pang of the love they once shared, but the anger and betrayal were too strong to ignore. "You already have," she said softly. To everyone watching, what would you do if you were in Cassie's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Cassie spent the next few days in a haze, trying to figure out her next steps. She confided in her best friend Lily, who didn't hold back. "Cass, you deserve better," Lily said over coffee. "He betrayed your trust. Whether or not he crossed the line physically doesn't matter. Emotional cheating is just as bad." Cassie nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I just don't know if I'm ready to throw away 15 years of marriage." "But do you want to spend the next 15 years wondering if he's telling you the truth?" Lily countered. The question hit Cassie hard. She had been so focused on uncovering Ethan's secrets that she hadn't stopped to think about what she wanted. That night, she wrote Ethan a letter. It wasn't an ultimatum, but it was clear. If he wanted to rebuild their marriage, he needed to earn her trust back, and that would take time, effort, and complete honesty. When she handed him the letter, Ethan read it in silence. Then he looked up at her, his eyes filled with regret. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said. But Cassie wasn't sure if she believed him. Cassie's decision to demand accountability from Ethan wasn't just a turning point for their marriage. It was the moment she began reclaiming control over her own life. She had given him the letter, laying out the steps he needed to take if he wanted to save their relationship. But deep down, Cassie knew that actions spoke louder than words. Ethan's initial reaction was promising. He apologized profusely, insisting he would do whatever it took to rebuild her trust. He even suggested going to couples counseling, which surprised Cassie. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could fix this. But as the days turned into weeks, Cassie began to notice a pattern. Ethan's apologies came easily, but his behavior, that was harder to pin down. Sure, he had stopped working late nights and spent more time at home, but there was still a guardedness about him, a reluctance to let her in fully. It was like he was going through the motions without truly addressing the root of the problem. And then, there was Marissa. Cassie couldn't stop thinking about her. Was she still in the picture? Had Ethan really cut ties with her, or was he just being more discreet? Cassie hated how much space Marissa occupied in her mind, but she couldn't help it. She needed answers. One evening, while Ethan was out running errands, Cassie decided to take matters into her own hands. She logged into the tracking app she had installed on his phone weeks earlier. She had promised herself she wouldn't use it again, that she would give Ethan the benefit of the doubt. But the nagging voice in her head wouldn't let her rest. To her surprise, Ethan's location history showed nothing out of the ordinary. He had gone to the grocery store, as he'd said he would, and then straight home. No detours, no suspicious stops. For a moment, Cassie felt a wave of relief. Maybe he really was trying to change. But just as she was about to close the app, she noticed something else, an unfamiliar number listed in his recent contacts. Her stomach twisted as she stared at it, debating whether to call. In the end, curiosity won out. She dialed the number, her heart pounding in her chest. A woman's voice answered. "Hello?" Cassie froze. It wasn't Marissa's voice. It was someone older, calmer. Hi," she stammered. "I'm sorry, I think I have the wrong number." The woman paused. "No problem, have a good night." Cassie hung up, her mind racing. Who was this woman? Why was Ethan calling her? She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than Ethan was letting on. The next morning, Cassie confronted Ethan about the number. He looked genuinely confused at first, but when she pressed him, his expression shifted. "That's my therapist," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I've been seeing her for a few weeks now. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want you to think I couldn't handle this on my own." Cassie blinked, caught off guard. "You've been seeing a therapist? Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan sighed. "Because I was embarrassed. Okay, I've been trying to work through my own issues so I can be a better husband to you. I know I've messed up, Cassie. I wanted to fix it on my own before dragging you into it." For the first time in a long time, Cassie saw vulnerability in Ethan's eyes. It wasn't the smooth-talking charm he usually relied on. It was raw, genuine. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or skeptical. Over the next few weeks, things seemed to improve. Ethan started opening up more during their counseling sessions, admitting to his emotional attachment to Marissa and how it had clouded his judgment. He promised that the relationship was over and that he was committed to rebuilding what they had lost. Cassie wanted to believe him, and for a while, she did. They even began spending quality time together again, going on hikes, cooking dinner, and reminiscing about the early days of their marriage. It felt like they were finally turning a corner. But just as Cassie started to let her guard down, she stumbled across something that shattered her fragile hope. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Ethan had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. While he ran upstairs to grab something, Cassie wasn't looking for anything incriminating. She was just moving it out of the way. But when the screen lit up, she saw an email notification that stopped her cold. It was from Marissa. The subject line read, "Last night." Cassie's hands trembled as she clicked on the email. Her breath caught in her throat as she read Marissa's words. "Ethan, I can't stop thinking about last night. I know we said we wouldn't do this again, but it's just so hard to stay away. Please tell me you feel the same." Cassie felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. All the progress they had made, all the promises Ethan had made. It was all a lie. When Ethan came back downstairs, Cassie was waiting for him, the laptop open on the counter. She didn't say a word, just pointed to the email. Ethan's face went pale. "Cassie, I can explain." "Don't," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Just don't." That night, Cassie packed a bag and left. She couldn't stay in that house, surrounded by the memories of their life together. She needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out what came next. She stayed with Lily for a few days, pouring her heart out over late-night glasses of wine. Lily was furious on her behalf, but she also encouraged Cassie to think about what she wanted. Not what Ethan wanted, not what anyone else expected, but what would make her happy. For the first time in a long time, Cassie started to imagine a life without Ethan. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. She realized she didn't want to spend the rest of her life wondering if she could trust him. She deserved better. Meanwhile, Ethan was desperate to win her back. He sent flowers, left voicemails, and even showed up at Lily's doorstep, begging for another chance. But Cassie wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. During one particularly emotional phone call, Ethan broke down. "I messed up, Cassie. I know I don't deserve you, but I can't lose you. Please, just tell me what I need to do." Cassie's voice was steady as she replied, "You need to figure out who you are without me, Ethan, because right now, I don't even recognize the man I married." As the weeks went on, Cassie focused on rebuilding her own life. She threw herself into her work, started going to yoga classes, and even joined a book club. Slowly but surely, she began to feel like herself again. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed to be unraveling. He sent Cassie a letter, a long, heartfelt apology, in which he admitted to everything: the emotional affair, the lies, the broken promises. He told her he was willing to wait as long as it took for her to forgive him. But Cassie wasn't sure forgiveness was enough. The story was building toward its climax, and the tension between Cassie and Ethan was at an all-time high. Would Cassie be able to move on from the betrayal, or would Ethan's efforts to win her back be enough to save their marriage? One thing was certain: the decisions they made in the coming weeks would change their lives forever. Cassie had always believed that clarity came with time, but as the days turned into weeks, clarity was the last thing she felt. Instead, she was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal, and, most frustratingly, a flicker of hope. It was that small, stubborn hope that kept her second-guessing herself. Was there still something worth salvaging, or was it time to let go? Ethan, for his part, wasn't giving up. He threw himself into therapy, doubling his sessions, and insisting to Cassie that he was finally doing the work to address the deeper issues that had led him astray. He called less frequently, respecting her boundaries, but when he did, his words carried a rawness that was hard to ignore. "Cassie, I know I've hurt you," he said during one of their calls. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I need you to know that I'm not the same man who made those mistakes I'm trying." Cassie wanted to believe him, but the scars were still too fresh. She hung up the phone, her heart heavy, and wondered if trying was enough. One evening, while sorting through some old photos, Cassie came across a picture from their honeymoon. They were standing on a beach in Maui, arms wrapped around each other, grinning like they didn't have a care in the world. Cassie stared at the photo, her fingers tracing the edges. She missed that version of Ethan, the man who made her laugh until her sides hurt, who looked at her like she was the only person in the world. But the man in that photo felt like a stranger now. Lily found her in tears later that night. "Cass, you have to stop torturing yourself," she said gently. "Either you give him another chance, or you let him go, but this in between is only going to break you." Cassie nodded, wiping her tears. She knew Lily was right. She needed to make a decision. But every time she thought she'd made up her mind, doubt crept in. The turning point came when Cassie received an unexpected message from Marissa. It was short and to the point. "I think we need to talk. There are things you should know about Ethan." Cassie's stomach dropped. She stared at the message, her mind racing. What could Marissa possibly have to say? Was she reaching out to clear her conscience? Or was this another game against her better judgment? Cassie replied, agreeing to meet. They met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, a neutral ground far from prying eyes. Cassie arrived first, her nerves jangling. She wasn't sure what to expect: an apology, a confrontation, or something entirely different. When Marissa walked in, Cassie was struck by how different she looked. Gone was the polished, confident woman from the office photos. She seemed tired, almost fragile, as if the weight of the past few months had taken its toll. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Marissa said, sitting down across from her. "I wasn't sure I should," Cassie replied, her tone guarded. "What do you want?" Marissa took a deep breath. "I need to apologize. For everything. I never meant to hurt you, Cassie. I got caught up in something I shouldn't have, and I crossed lines I shouldn't have crossed." Cassie folded her arms, her skepticism evident. "And now you're having a change of heart? Why?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Marissa said simply. "And because I think you deserve the truth." What followed was a conversation that left Cassie reeling. Marissa admitted to the emotional affair, confirming everything Cassie had suspected. But there was more. Things Cassie hadn't known. Marissa revealed that Ethan had confided in her about his struggles. Long before their relationship crossed a line, he had painted a picture of a man overwhelmed by his responsibilities, feeling unappreciated and disconnected. It wasn't an excuse, Marissa insisted, but it was the context that had drawn them together. "I know it's not my place to say this," Marissa said, her voice trembling, "but I think Ethan really does love you. He talked about you all the time, how much he admired you, how he felt like he'd let you down. I think he was just lost." Cassie sat in silence, absorbing Marissa's words. She didn't know whether to feel vindicated, furious, or heartbroken. Maybe all three. Before leaving, Marissa handed Cassie an envelope. "I found this when I was cleaning out my desk," she said. "It's a letter Ethan wrote to you. He never sent it, but I think you should have it." Cassie stared at the envelope, unsure whether to take it, but curiosity won out. She slipped it into her bag and left without saying another word. That night, Cassie sat alone in her room, the envelope resting on the bed beside her. She debated whether to open it, afraid of what it might contain, but eventually, her curiosity got the better of her. The letter was raw, unpolished, and deeply personal. Ethan had poured his heart onto the page, admitting to his mistakes, his insecurities, and his fear of losing her. He wrote about the guilt that consumed him, and his desperate desire to make things right. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement of his failures and a promise to be better, whether or not Cassie decided to stay. Tears blurred her vision as she read the final line. "No matter what happens, you'll always be the best thing that ever happened to me." The letter left Cassie more conflicted than ever. She couldn't deny the sincerity in Ethan's words, but sincerity alone wasn't enough to erase the pain he had caused. She needed more than words. She needed proof that he had truly changed. When Ethan called the next day, Cassie told him about her meeting with Marissa. To her surprise, he didn't react with anger or defensiveness. Instead, he thanked her for giving him the chance to explain. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Cassie," he said, "but I'll spend the rest of my life earning it, if you'll let me." Cassie didn't respond right away. For the first time, she felt like the ball was truly in her court. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Cassie threw herself into work, trying to distract herself from the decision looming over her. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the question, could she ever trust Ethan again? The climax of the story came on a rainy Friday evening. Ethan showed up at Cassie's door, drenched from head to toe, holding a notebook. Cassie hesitated before letting him in, unsure of what to expect. "I've been writing everything down," he said, handing her the notebook. "All the things I've learned in therapy, all the ways I've hurt you, and all the ways I'm trying to be better. I wanted you to see it for yourself." Cassie flipped through the pages, her heart aching as she read Ethan's reflections. He had written about his fears, his regrets, and the steps he was taking to rebuild his sense of self. It was the most vulnerable she had ever seen him. "I'm not asking you to make a decision tonight," Ethan said quietly. "I just needed you to know that I'm not giving up. Not on you, not on us." Cassie looked at him, her emotions swirling. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like they were finally facing the truth. Together. Cassie spent the following days poring over Ethan's notebook. It was filled with raw, unfiltered reflections, some pages smeared with what looked like tear stains. Each entry was like a window into his mind, exposing layers of guilt, regret, and determination she hadn't seen before. For all his faults, Ethan had clearly been doing the work, but the question still lingered. Was it enough? One passage caught her attention. In it, Ethan wrote about the moment he realized he had crossed a line with Marissa. "I convinced myself it was harmless," he wrote, "that it was okay to share pieces of myself with her because I was keeping my distance physically. But the truth is, I was using her to fill a void I didn't have the courage to address. I was selfish. I betrayed Cassie in a way I never thought I could, and I hate myself for it." Cassie's hands trembled as she read the words. She could see his pain, his remorse, but it didn't erase the damage that had been done. Forgiveness felt like an impossible mountain to climb, and yet a small part of her wanted to try. Ethan's actions in the weeks that followed continued to reflect his commitment. He gave Cassie the space she needed, showing up only when she invited him. He threw himself into therapy and started attending a support group for people struggling with emotional infidelity. He even canceled his gym membership, explaining that he wanted to remove any triggers or habits tied to the person he used to be. But despite his efforts, Cassie remained cautious. She was afraid to trust him, afraid to let herself hope again. She'd been burned once, and she wasn't sure she could survive it a second time. The pivotal moment came during one of their couple's therapy sessions. It had been weeks since they'd sat across from each other in the therapist's office, and the air between them was thick with unspoken tension. "I want to talk about the letter," Cassie said, breaking the silence. "The one Marissa gave me." Ethan flinched, but he nodded. "Okay. You poured your heart into that letter," Cassie continued, her voice steady. "You said all the right things, but why didn't you send it? Why did I have to hear it from her instead of you?" Ethan looked down, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Because I was scared," he admitted. "I was scared that if I sent it, it would push you further away, that it would be too little, too late." Cassie's chest tightened. "You didn't trust me to decide that for myself." "I didn't trust myself," Ethan countered. "I thought if I gave you the letter, it would just be another excuse. Another way for me to shift the burden onto you instead of owning my mistakes. I was wrong, Cassie. I see that now." Their therapist interjected gently, guiding them through the conversation. For the first time, Cassie felt like they were truly communicating, not just exchanging words, but understanding each other. Later that evening, Cassie sat on the back porch, staring out at the stars. She thought about the life they had built together, the years of love and laughter that had been overshadowed by betrayal. Was it worth fighting for? Could they find their way back to each other? Ethan joined her after a while, sitting a few feet away to give her space. He didn't say anything at first, just sat quietly, waiting for her to speak. "Do you remember our first date?" Cassie asked suddenly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Of course, the Italian place downtown. You ordered spaghetti and spilled sauce all over your dress." Cassie chuckled softly. "And you tried to help clean it up, but you made it worse." "I was so nervous," Ethan admitted. I didn't want to mess it up." "You didn't," Cassie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was the night I knew I wanted to be with you." Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and sorrow. "I want to be that man for you again, Cassie. The one who makes you feel safe, who makes you laugh, who loves you the way you deserve to be loved." Cassie didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. It wasn't an answer, but it was a start. The climax of their story unfolded over the next few weeks as they worked tirelessly to rebuild their relationship. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but there were also small victories. A shared laugh over breakfast, a meaningful conversation that brought them closer, a glimpse of the love that had once defined them. The turning point came during a weekend retreat, recommended by their therapist. It was designed for couples rebuilding trust after infidelity, and it forced them to confront their deepest fears and vulnerabilities. For Cassie, it was an opportunity to express the pain and anger she had been holding on to for months. For Ethan, it was a chance to take accountability and show Cassie that he was willing to fight for her. On the final night of the retreat, they participated in an exercise where they had to write letters to each other, expressing their hopes for the future. Cassie's letter was hesitant but honest, outlining her desire to move forward while acknowledging her lingering fears. Ethan's letter, on the other hand, was a heartfelt declaration of his love and commitment. "I know I can't undo the past," he wrote, "but I promise to spend the rest of my life proving that I've learned from it. You are my heart, Cassie, and I'll never take that for granted again." The retreat marked a turning point in their journey. It didn't fix everything. There was still work to be done, but it gave them a foundation to build on. Slowly but surely, they began to find their way back to each other. Cassie started to let her guard down, allowing herself to trust Ethan in small, cautious steps. Ethan, for his part, continued to prioritize their relationship, proving through his actions that he was committed to being the husband Cassie deserved. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching an old movie, Cassie leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of peace. "I love you," Ethan said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. Cassie looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "I love you too." It was a long road to the climax of their story, but one thing was clear. Both Cassie and Ethan had grown in ways they never thought possible. Their relationship wasn't perfect, no relationship ever is, but they were learning to navigate the challenges together, one step at a time. Cassie and Ethan's journey toward reconciliation seemed to be finding its footing, but like any path built on fractured trust, it was far from smooth. Despite the progress they'd made, doubts lingered in the shadows, threatening to undo everything they had worked for. The scars of betrayal don't heal overnight, and for Cassie, they were a constant reminder of what had been lost. But life doesn't pause for personal growth. One day, Cassie's work life collided with her personal struggles when she was asked to lead a major project at her school. It was a career-defining opportunity, something she'd dreamed of for years. The timing couldn't have been worse, but Cassie knew she couldn't let her personal life derail her professional ambitions, so she threw herself into the project, hoping it would provide the distraction she desperately needed. Ethan noticed the shift. Cassie became busier, more distant. Their once frequent conversations dwindled, replaced by long nights of Cassie grading papers and Ethan sitting alone in the living room. It was a painful reminder of the distance that still existed between them. "I feel like I'm losing you all over again," Ethan admitted one night as Cassie worked late into the evening. Cassie sighed, setting down her pen. "Ethan, this project is important to me. I can't put my life on hold forever." "I know," he said, his voice heavy. "But I don't want us to fall back into old patterns. I'm scared that if we don't prioritize us, we'll lose what we've fought so hard to rebuild." His words struck a nerve Cassie wanted to reassure him, but she couldn't ignore the truth. Rebuilding their relationship was exhausting, and sometimes she wondered if it was worth the effort. The tension reached a boiling point one weekend when Ethan suggested a spontaneous getaway, a chance to reconnect without the distractions of work or therapy. At first, Cassie resisted. The thought of being alone with Ethan for an entire weekend felt overwhelming. But after some coaxing and a particularly bad day at work, she agreed. They drove up to the mountains, where Ethan had rented a cozy cabin, surrounded by towering pines and crystal-clear lakes. It was the kind of place that invited reflection, whether you wanted it or not. The first night was tense. They made small talk over dinner, but the weight of their unresolved issues hung heavy in the air. Cassie could see that Ethan was trying. He cooked her favorite meal, brought her wine, and even lit candles. But she couldn't shake her lingering doubts. Later, as they sat by the fireplace, Ethan broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever get back to the way we were?" he asked, his voice soft but tinged with desperation. Cassie stared into the flames, her mind racing. "I don't know," she admitted. "I want to believe we can, but it's hard. Every time I start to trust you again, that little voice in my head reminds me of everything that happened." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I hate that I put that voice there. If I could take it all back, I would." "I know," Cassie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But wanting to change and actually changing are two different things. I need to see that this isn't just words, Ethan. I need to feel it." The second day of their trip brought an unexpected breakthrough. They decided to go hiking, a shared passion they hadn't indulged in for years. The fresh air and physical activity seemed to break down some of the walls between them. For the first time in weeks, they laughed together, reminiscing about old adventures and dreaming of new ones. As they reached the summit of the trail, Ethan turned to Cassie, his expression serious. "I know I can't erase what I did, but I promise you, I'm never going to stop trying to be the man you deserve." Cassie felt tears prick her eyes. "I want to believe you, Ethan, I really do." "Then let me prove it," he said, his voice steady. "Let's start fresh, not as the people we were, but as the people we're becoming." For the first time, Cassie felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something new. Their return from the mountains marked a shift in their relationship. Cassie noticed small but meaningful changes in Ethan's behavior. He began taking a more active interest in her work, asking about her project, and offering to help in any way he could. He planned date nights, surprising her with thoughtful gestures that reminded her of the man she fell in love with. But the most significant change came during a conversation about Marissa. Ethan brought up the topic unprompted, wanting to address the lingering elephant in the room. "I want you to know that I've cut all ties with Marissa," he said. "She's no longer part of my life, and she never will be again. I blocked her number, removed her from my contacts, and even asked to transfer to a different branch so I wouldn't have to see her at work." Cassie's eyes widened. "You're transferring?" Ethan nodded. "I need a fresh start, just like we do. Staying in the same environment where I made those mistakes doesn't feel right." Cassie was stunned. For months she had been waiting for Ethan to show her through his actions that he was committed to change. This was the proof she needed. Despite the progress, the climax of their story was far from over. The final test of their relationship came during a dinner party hosted by one of Ethan's coworkers. It was the first social event they had attended as a couple since the affair came to light, and the pressure was palpable. Cassie felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach as they entered the elegant townhouse. She scanned the room, half expecting to see Marissa, but she was nowhere in sight. Still, the whispers and sideways glances from Ethan's colleagues made it clear that their struggles were far from a secret. As the evening wore on, Cassie found herself cornered by a group of coworkers who seemed all too eager to gossip. "I heard Ethan's been working on himself," one woman said, her tone dripping with faux sympathy. "That must be challenging for you." Cassie clenched her jaw, forcing a polite smile. "Every relationship has its challenges. What matters is how you face them." Her response seemed to take the woman by surprise, and she quickly changed the subject. But the encounter left Cassie feeling raw and exposed. Later that night, as they walked back to their car, Ethan noticed her quiet demeanor. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Cassie hesitated before replying. "It's hard, Ethan. Being in a room full of people who know about what happened, it makes me feel like I'm wearing a scarlet letter." Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her. "You don't deserve that," he said firmly. "If anyone should feel shame, it's me. I'm so sorry that my actions have made you feel this way. Cassie looked into his eyes and saw the sincerity in his expression. For the first time, she felt like they were truly in this together. The dinner party marked a turning point in their journey. It was a reminder that while the road ahead would be difficult, they had the strength to face it together. Cassie began to let go of the anger and resentment that had been holding her back, allowing herself to embrace the possibility of a future with Ethan. The climactic moments of their story weren't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. They were about the quiet, everyday acts of love and commitment that slowly rebuilt the foundation of their relationship. It was in the way Ethan held her hand during a tough conversation, or the way Cassie opened up about her fears without holding back. It was in the shared laughter, the stolen glances, and the renewed sense of partnership that grew stronger with each passing day. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was real, and in the end, that was enough. The weekend following the dinner party was supposed to be a time of calm, a chance for Cassie and Ethan to decompress after the emotional gauntlet they had just navigated, but instead, it became the stage for the most critical turning point in their relationship. Cassie woke early Saturday morning, her mind buzzing with unresolved thoughts from the week she found herself scrolling through an old folder of photos on her laptop, one she hadn't touched since before the affair. It was filled with moments that captured the love and laughter they once shared. Beach trips, birthdays, lazy Sundays spent cooking in the kitchen. As the images flickered across the screen, she was struck by a sudden realization. She missed that life, but more than that, she missed the woman she used to be. The Cassie in those photos was confident, carefree, and full of joy. She didn't feel like that woman anymore. She wasn't sure if she ever could again. Later that morning, Ethan found her sitting on the porch, staring blankly at the sunrise. He carried 2 mugs of coffee, offering one to her as he sat down beside her. "You've been quiet," he said, his tone soft but probing. Cassie sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "I've been thinking about us, about who we were, and who we are now." Ethan's expression grew serious. "And? I don't know if we can ever go back to what we had," she admitted, "but I also don't know if that's a bad thing." He frowned slightly, unsure of where she was going. "I think we've spent so much time trying to rebuild the old version of us," Cassie continued, "that we haven't stopped to think about what the new version of us could look like. Maybe it's not about going back. Maybe it's about moving forward." Ethan nodded slowly, taking in her words. "What does moving forward look like to you?" Cassie hesitated, then met his gaze. "It looks like honesty. It looks like choosing each other every day, even when it's hard, and it looks like giving ourselves permission to grow, even if that means letting go of some of the things that used to define us." Ethan reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I want that too, Cassie. I want us to build something new, something stronger than before, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get there." For the first time in a long time, Cassie felt a glimmer of hope, not for the past they had lost, but for the future they could create. That afternoon, they decided to tackle a project together, repainting the guest room. It was a simple task, but it became a metaphor for their relationship, a chance to work side by side, to communicate, to rebuild. They laughed as they argued over color swatches, teased each other about their painting skills, and shared stories about the early days of their marriage. By the time they finished, the room was bathed in a soft, calming shade of blue. Cassie stepped back, admiring their work. "It's amazing what a fresh coat of paint can do," she said with a smile. Ethan slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "It feels like a new beginning." Cassie leaned into him, allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were on the right path. But the calm didn't last. The following week, Cassie received an email from Marissa. It was unexpected, unwelcome, and completely unsettling. The subject line read, "For closure." Cassie hesitated before opening it. The message was short and cryptic. "Cassie, I know I said everything I needed to when we met, but there's one more thing you should know. Ethan didn't tell you everything about his transfer. If you want the truth, you know where to find me." Cassie's heart raced as she reread the email. What could Marissa possibly mean? She had thought they were done with this, thought the chapter had been closed, but now, Doubts crept back in, threatening to undo all the progress they had made. That evening, Cassie confronted Ethan. She showed him the email, watching his reaction closely. His face paled, and his jaw tightened, a telltale sign that there was more to the story. "What is she talking about, Ethan?" Cassie demanded. "What didn't you tell me?" Ethan hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "It's nothing," he said finally. "She's just trying to stir up trouble." "That's not good enough," Cassie shot back. "If we're going to move forward, I need complete honesty from you. No more half-truths, no more omissions. So I'm asking you again, what didn't you tell me?" Ethan sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine. The transfer wasn't entirely my idea." Cassie's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "After everything that happened, the company suggested it might be best if I moved to a different branch," Ethan admitted. "They didn't want any distractions in the office." "Distractions?" Cassie repeated, her voice rising. "You mean Marissa?" Ethan nodded, shame written all over his face. "They didn't fire me, but it was clear that staying wasn't an option. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think I was running away." Cassie stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind of anger and disappointment. "Do you have any idea how hard I've been working to trust you again? And now I find out you've been keeping this from me?" "I didn't want to hurt you," Ethan said desperately. "I thought I was protecting you." "No, Ethan," Cassie snapped. "You were protecting yourself, and now I'm back to wondering if I'll ever be able to trust you." The tension in the days that followed was palpable. Ethan tried to apologize, but Cassie needed space. She spent hours walking through the park, replaying their conversation in her mind. Every step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the realization that trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. It was a process, one that required honesty, vulnerability, and time. And right now, it felt like time was running out. The climactic moment came during their next therapy session. Cassie laid everything on the table, the email, the transfer, the lies she didn't hold back, letting all of her anger and frustration spill out. "I'm tired of feeling like I'm the only one fighting for this," she said, her voice trembling. "You keep saying you want to change, but how can I believe you when you keep hiding things from me?" Ethan looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. "I don't know how to do this, Cassie. I'm trying, but I keep screwing up. I don't know how to make you believe that I'm all in." Their therapist intervened, guiding them through the conversation. She helped Ethan see how his actions, even when well-intentioned, continued to erode Cassie's trust. She helped Cassie find the words to express her fears without shutting down. And perhaps most importantly, she reminded them both that rebuilding a relationship was never a straight line. It was messy, painful, and imperfect, but it was possible. By the end of the session, something shifted. Ethan looked at Cassie with a newfound determination. "I can't promise I'll get everything right," he said, "but I can promise that I'll never stop trying. I'll never stop fighting for us." Cassie nodded, her walls softening just a little. "Then show me. Ethan, show me that you mean it." The climactic tension had reached its peak, and the stakes had never been higher. Cassie and Ethan were standing at a crossroads, their future hanging in the balance. The next steps they took would determine whether their story ended in reconciliation or heartbreak. Cassie left the therapy session feeling emotionally drained, but slightly more hopeful. Ethan's words, his plea to show her his commitment, echoed in her mind. She wanted to believe him, but a part of her still held on to the fear of being hurt again. Trust, she realized, wasn't just something Ethan had to earn. It was something she had to relearn. The following week, Ethan decided to take the first major step in proving his commitment. He arranged a dinner with his parents, inviting Cassie to join. It was an attempt to integrate her back into the parts of his life he had once kept distant during his infidelity. Cassie hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready to face the scrutiny of family, but eventually she agreed. That Saturday evening, Cassie found herself seated at a beautifully set dining table in Ethan's parents' home. His mother, Ellen, was warm and welcoming as always, but Cassie couldn't help but notice the subtle glances exchanged between her and Ethan. His father, a man of few words, remained stoic throughout the evening, occasionally chiming in with polite conversation. Ethan, however, was visibly tense. He seemed to be walking on eggshells, trying to please everyone at the table, while avoiding any potential landmines. Cassie felt for him, but she also knew this was part of the process. They couldn't rebuild without addressing the elephant in the room. It wasn't long before Ellen broke the tension. "Cassie," she began, her tone gentle, "we've missed seeing you around. It's been hard watching you and Ethan go through this, but I want you to know that we're here for you, both of you." Cassie offered a small smile, appreciating the sentiment, but unsure how to respond. Before she could find the words, Ethan jumped in. "Mom, Dad, I need to say something," he said, his voice steady but nervous. "I need to take responsibility for the things I've done, for the ways I've hurt Cassie." Ellen's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded for him to continue. "I made mistakes, big ones," Ethan admitted. "I let my insecurities and selfishness get the best of me, and I betrayed the person who matters most to me. I've been doing everything I can to make things right, but I know that trust takes time. I need you to know how sorry I am." Cassie's chest tightened as she listened. It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it, with a vulnerability and sincerity she hadn't seen before. Ellen reached across the table, placing a hand over Ethan's. "We're proud of you, Ethan. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong and to try to make amends." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and shared memories. By the time they left, Cassie felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to shift. The real turning point came a week later, when Cassie's school hosted an open house for parents Ethan had volunteered to help, offering to greet families and assist with setting up. At first, Cassie was hesitant. She didn't want to blur the lines between her personal and professional life, but Ethan insisted. As the evening unfolded, Cassie couldn't help but notice how different Ethan seemed. He was engaged, attentive, and genuinely interested in her work. He spoke to parents with ease, praised Cassie's dedication to her students, and even stayed late to help clean up. After the last parent had left, Cassie found Ethan in her classroom, stacking chairs. He looked up as she entered, a small smile playing on his lips. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "I wanted to," he replied. "I wanted to be a part of your world. I feel like I've spent so much time taking from you. Your trust, your patience, your love. I wanted to give something back." Cassie felt a lump form in her throat. She crossed the room, standing in front of him. "You're trying," she said softly. "I see that, and I appreciate it." Ethan reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "I'll keep trying, Cassie, for as long as it takes." But just as things seemed to be falling into place, a storm hit. Marissa resurfaced once again, this time with a dramatic twist. She posted a cryptic message on social media, alluding to unfinished business with Ethan. The post was vague, but it was enough to send Cassie spiraling. When she confronted Ethan about it, he was visibly frustrated. "I have no idea what she's talking about," he insisted. "I haven't spoken to her since the transfer." "Then why would she say something like this?" Cassie demanded, her voice tinged with panic. "It feels like she's trying to get in my head." "Because she probably is," Ethan said, his tone firm but calm. "She knows I've moved on, and she doesn't like it. But I swear to you, Cassie, there's nothing there." Cassie wanted to believe him, but the scars of betrayal were hard to ignore. She spent the next few days battling a wave of doubt, questioning whether she could truly leave the past behind. The climax came during an impromptu visit to their therapist. Cassie poured out her fears, her frustrations, and her exhaustion. "I feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop," she admitted. "I want to move forward, but I don't know how to stop living in the past." Their therapist listened intently before offering a piece of advice that stuck with Cassie. "Trust isn't about never having doubts," she said. "It's about choosing to believe in the person standing in front of you, even when those doubts creep in. The question you have to ask yourself is Ethan the man you believe in today?" Cassie looked at Ethan, who was sitting across from her, his expression earnest. In that moment, she realized something important. The man sitting in front of her wasn't the same man who had betrayed her. He was flawed, yes, but he was also trying, really trying, to be better, and maybe, just maybe, That was enough. As they left the therapist's office, Ethan turned to Cassie. "I know I've given you every reason not to believe in me," he said, "but I hope you can see how much I've changed, how much I want to keep changing for you, for us." Cassie nodded, a small smile breaking through her serious expression. "I do see it, Ethan, and I want to believe in us again." It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was a start, and for the first time in a long time, Cassie felt like they were truly on the same page. The days that followed the therapy session were pivotal for Cassie and Ethan. They weren't just trying to rebuild their marriage anymore. They were forging something new, something stronger. The lingering shadows of Marissa and the betrayal no longer felt like insurmountable obstacles. Instead, they became a reminder of how far they had come. One of the biggest changes was how they communicated. Cassie stopped holding back her feelings, no matter how difficult they were to express. And Ethan? He listened. Really listened. There were still moments of tension, of course. Old wounds have a way of resurfacing at the worst times, but they tackled them together, one conversation at a time. Their breakthrough moment came during an impromptu trip to the same beach where they had taken their honeymoon photo. It was Ethan's idea, a way to recapture a piece of their shared history while creating something new. As they walked along the shoreline, Cassie couldn't help but reflect on everything they'd been through. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the endless cycle of doubt. It had tested her in ways she never thought possible. But standing there with Ethan, watching the waves crash against the sand, she realized something. She wasn't the same person she had been before the affair, and that was okay. "You know," she said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I've spent so much time trying to figure out if we could get back to who we were, but maybe we're not supposed to." Ethan looked at her, his expression soft but serious. "What do you mean?" Cassie stopped walking, turning to face him. "I think we've both changed, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we're supposed to be different, to be better." Ethan nodded, his hand reaching for hers. "Better sounds good." That evening, they sat on the beach watching the sunset. For the first time in what felt like forever, Cassie felt at peace. She leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "I don't want to lose this," Ethan said quietly. "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," Cassie replied, her voice steady. "As long as we keep choosing each other, we'll be okay." Over the next few months, their relationship continued to grow. They fell into a new rhythm, one that prioritized honesty and connection. Ethan threw himself into his new job, using the fresh start as an opportunity to prove to himself, and to Cassie, that he could be the man she deserved, and Cassie. She started carving out more time for herself, rediscovering the hobbies and passions she had let fall by the wayside. Their friends and family noticed the difference too. At a dinner with Lily, Cassie's best friend pulled her aside, a sly smile on her face. "You seem lighter," Lily said. "Like you finally let go of all that baggage." Cassie laughed softly. "I think I have. It wasn't easy, but I've realized that holding on to anger and doubt was only hurting me. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means moving forward." As the year drew to a close, Cassie and Ethan decided to renew their vows in a small, intimate ceremony. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending the affair hadn't happened. It was about acknowledging the work they had put in to rebuild their marriage and celebrating the future they were creating together. The ceremony took place in their backyard, under a canopy of twinkling fairy lights. Cassie wore a simple white dress, and Ethan stood at the end of the aisle, his eyes filled with tears as he watched her walk toward him. When it was time to exchange vows, Ethan went first. His voice trembled as he spoke, but his words were steady and heartfelt. "Cassie, I've made mistakes. Mistakes that hurt you, hurt us. But every day, I wake up grateful for the chance to make things right. You are my heart, my home, and my reason to keep growing. I promise to love you, to honor you, and to fight for us, no matter what." Cassie's vows were just as emotional. "Ethan, you broke my heart, but you also showed me what it means to fight for love. You've taught me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward. Even when it's hard, I choose you, today and every day, because I believe in the man you've become." As they exchanged rings, surrounded by their closest friends and family, Cassie felt a sense of closure. This wasn't the end of their story. It was a new beginning. In the months that followed, Cassie and Ethan continued to build on the foundation they had created. They started traveling more, making a point to explore new places together. They joined a local volunteer group, finding joy in giving back to their community. And most importantly, they kept talking about their hopes, their fears, and the lessons they had learned along the way. Cassie also found new confidence in herself. She took on leadership roles at work, pursued hobbies she had long abandoned, and even started mentoring younger teachers. For the first time in years, she felt like her own person, not just Ethan's wife. Ethan, too, continued to grow. He became a vocal advocate for mental health in the workplace, sharing his own journey in the hopes of helping others. His honesty and vulnerability inspired his coworkers, and for the first time in a long time, he felt truly proud of the man he was becoming. Looking back, Cassie realized that the affair, as painful as it was, had forced them to confront the cracks in their relationship, and in themselves, it had been a brutal, messy journey, but it had also led them to a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly love and forgive. Their story wasn't perfect. It wasn't tied up in a neat bow, but it was real. And in the end, that was all that mattered. If you've enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share your thoughts. Your support means everything, and we can't wait to bring you more captivating tales. See you in the next video.